Our next speaker is Donna Dodson, and who is a visual artist based in Boston, Massachusetts. She is currently a resident scholar at the Brandeis University Women's Studies Research Center. Donna received a Fulbright U.S. Scholar Award to be an artist in residence at Q21 Museums Cartier with her host institution, Tricky Women, Tricky Realities, the world's first and only animation festival for women in the spring of 2022. Donna's pronouns are she, her, and hers. Donna.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you, Sarah, for organizing this panel. I think I'll jump right into this. Let's see, the beginning, sorry. So I am a, as Walter mentioned, I'm currently at Brandeis University. The Women's Studies Research Center is affiliated, of course, with the Women and Gender Studies Department. I have been there since 2019. I began as what they call a visiting scholar, where I was focused on the ancient Amazons. I'm also a visual artist, and so my excuse me, my residency there was really focused on research that would lead to a new body of work. My primary medium is wood sculpture and wood carving, and so I responded to this call for papers because I felt like my research had led me to discover that gender bias and a constricted feminine ideal prevented the Greeks from recognizing the Amazons as women. The famous quote by Lysias, where he says the Amazons were counted as men for their high courage rather than as women for their sex. I feel like this sets up a false binary where women can't be courageous, which is the title of my presentation. So I see these women as the original action figures in art history, and they certainly inspire me. So as I was researching, of course, Amazons in art, I was able to access, of course, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts collection, as well as the Met's, which has some of the finest Amazon in art in any collection in the world. I decided that I would recast Durer's Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse as Amazon warriors. That would be my goal for creating a new body of work. So, but I decided that I wouldn't use them as portraying sort of all the evils, currently plaguing our society, but they would fight against them. So, such as COVID or racism or gender violence or voter suppression as a way to investigate intersectional feminism. And so the image on the right is from Harvard's collection, Nicholas Henri Jacob, Hippolyta, Queen of the Amazons. So I also study art history, and of course there's Amazons in ancient art, but also Amazons in modern art. And this Franz von Stuck, I kept coming across his work. It's used on Adrian Mayer's book about the Amazons. This struck me as very problematic. Like, what kind of warrior would fight naked, for example? And so I felt like there was a lot of use of gratuitous nudity, centering the male gaze, objectified women. And so I felt like this in particular was perpetuating harmful gender stereotypes. So I decided I would counteract that in my own work. I mentioned my work with Walter. We've had numerous conversations. He co-presented with me at Brandeis last year, talking about women warriors from a non-Western perspective, which of course is the center of his scholarship and research. And I mentioned my great aunt was in the wax, and he mentioned that they were often referred to as Amazons. So my great aunt Alice was one of the first 40 women from Illinois to enroll as an officer in the wax in World War II. What I found particularly fascinating was that the wax used Pallas Athena's helmet as their insignia. My mother had this great picture of my great aunt Alice that shows her in uniform with Pallas Athena. And another connection is that Edith North Rogers, the Massachusetts Congresswoman, created the wax by legislation. And I currently live in Boston, Massachusetts. So this I found particularly interesting, that the United States military, they originally suggested to that they didn't know what they were going to do. They were obviously enrolled. One idea, they would free the men up to go to war, basically, and they would be involved in more administrative duties. And so one anecdote I came across is that they were going to be very busy, and how would they like to be the busy bees and have the bee is on their lapel? And they nixed that idea and they went for Athena, which I thought was very fitting. And so I was also referencing Athena in my work. She's often portrayed with breastplates. She's the goddess of not only war, but wisdom. And so another reference from my own work is the idea that Amazons had tattoos. And also that they hunted. And used eagles to hunt. So the idea of using many of these sources in my own work came into play. And then Adrienne Mayers, as I mentioned, I've often referenced her work in my practice, mentions the movements in archaeology where previously if a skeleton was discovered with weapons, it would be assumed to be male, but because of DNA, we know that a lot of these skeletons were actually women and female. So all of this inspires my work. The sculpture that I created, the first one in this series, is called Alpha Female. It's about 3.5 feet tall. And as I said, it's a wood carving, which is primarily what I do. I use the breastplates, the tattoo idea, using Athena's helmet, and of course, this sort of historic looking World War II uniform that the wax wore. So as I moved on in my own work, thinking about Amazons, ancient warrior women, I started thinking about warrior women around the world. So the Dahomey of West Africa are often referred to as the Amazons of Africa. That led me into, of course, modern pop culture, the movie Black Panther. A lot of people feel that the Dora Milaje referenced the Dahomey. As I dove further into researching Black Panther, I came across, of course, the comic strips as well as the movie. At one point, Ta-Nehisi Coates brought in Roxane Gay and other writers to kind of expand the characters in the comic strip. Roxane Gay wrote one issue called World of Wakanda, where she created 2 lovers, women lovers of the Dora Milaje, but it didn't make it into the movie. And so that's where I thought I would fill that void with my own work. At the same time, there was a recent show at the Addison Gallery of American Art called Men of Steel, Women of Wonder, with artists such as Rich Simmons, Renee Cox, and Stephen Paul Judd, creating visual images in contemporary art that expand the idea and representation of superheroes to include homosexual characters, Black women instead of white women as Wonder Woman, as well as, this is Superwoman, also Native American characters. So as I was thinking about Black Panther, one vase that kept coming up for me was this one in the collection of the MFA, where the women warriors actually riding a lion, which further led me to discover that Amazons were often associated with Cybele, or the mother of the gods. I was excited to see that there's like a whole panel on her later on today. So Cybele is often portrayed either in a throne flanked by lions, which made me think of Sekhmet, the Egyptian goddess, or in a chariot pulled by lions, which made me think of Giacometti's chariot. So I thought I would throw this image in of what I actually do, which is carve wood. And I usually use logs, and I use traditional material tools such as mallet and chisel, as well as chainsaws. But I was thinking specifically, I referenced this earlier about thinking about creating these two characters that were left out of the movie that were lovers. I came across the Lynn Hardwick's research, the idea that the Amazons were often defeated, but also Chinua Achebe, who says, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And so the two sculptures I created next to in this series are called Black Panther and Sibylle. And Sibylle especially has not a Scythian axe, but a labrys, which again is more of a lesbian feminist symbol. And they have matching tattoos. So again, the idea of tattoos is permeating this series for me. And they have a panther paw print inside the Venus symbol, referencing Angela Davis, certainly Octavia Butler, feminism, the Black Panther Party. And so the last sculpture in this series that I'll share today, I'm referencing the Rani of Jhansi, a historic Queen of India. There's a famous myth, perhaps, since very little was sort of written about her in her lifetime, which I think Jay observed earlier, that women were not often the subject of written history. And so everything that is written about her was written sort of after, and the Rani of Jhansi gets reinvented with every new generation. There's a famous story that when the British surrounded her castle, she strapped her baby to her back, her son actually, grabbed her sword, leapt off the castle wall, and landed on her horse and rode away. And so this is a very iconic image of her in art history and paintings, as well as sculpture. She's really a national hero. The other sort of influences and sources for my own work were, of course, the goddess Lakshmi, Shere Khan, the use of the tiger as a national symbol, also on the Indian rupee. And of course, the color palette I decided to use in this next work was the flag of India, since she's considered a national heroine. And so the Rani of Jhansi that I created is another wood carving. She has her sword, she has the sash, the colors of the Indian flag. She has a lotus on her for her tattoo. And this work was presented in 2021 at the Boston Sculptors Gallery. My show was called Amazons Among Us, which is, I use wood, which could be interpreted to say that these women have always been with us, but gender stereotypes have prevented us from recognizing them. So this was the presentation and sort of culmination of my work as a visiting scholar at Brandeis. I did apply to continue as a resident scholar, so I was promoted. I will be there for 3 more years. At this point, I decided that I would collaborate with an animator, Trina Baker, and we would reference more of the narratives found in ancient Greek and Roman art on the vases. And we would create digital avatars using each of these sculptures, and we would make a short animated movie. And so to do that work, I was referencing again the live action films. I thought it was particularly interesting that Wonder Woman, the first one, and then 1984 have come out in the last probably 2 to 3 years. I wasn't as familiar with the original Wonder Woman comic. Obviously, she's made Amazons very, famous in pop culture. I grew up with Linda Carter, spinning and twirling and fighting in a very powerful way. Also, Tomras, The Legend of Tomras, came out in 2019, Mulan in 2020, obviously Black Panther in 2018. So I thought it was interesting. And then, of course, the Warrior Queen of Jhansi. There's 2 that came out, an Americanized English language version, as well as a Hindi language version in 2019. And so I thought this convergence of sort of women warriors and pop culture was maybe not coincidental. So I'll just show you the first three figures that we have created. They exist in these word environments that a colleague of mine at Brandeis, Kay Melchor Hall, has created poems for each one of the sculptures. So our goal is to animate these, modeling them with Maya, and then rigging them to create 3D animations for each character. This will sort of be the trailer for the film. This is Black Panther. Again, the modeling imitates the wood grain on the sculptures. Each one sort of demonstrates their superheroine characteristics. And to do this work, I'm working with 2 student scholar partners at Brandeis, as well as 3 different interns from Lesley University, where Trina Baker is. And this is Sibylle. And these are the 3 we've done so far. This semester we'll be finishing up Ronnie of Johnsey. To complete this work, I was awarded a Fulbright U.S. Scholar Award. I will be working in residence at Tricky Women, which is a digital animation festival for women artists. And thank you. And I'll be happy to take questions in the chat or at the end of this cycle.
Thank you very much for another very stimulating paper. It's really great to see your sculptures come alive. Yeah, that was exciting. Thank you, Donna.